Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we are going to be going over the best champions to use awakening gems in my opinion. And obviously the use of awakening gems will largely depend on where you're at in the game, because I do know that due to increase in the availability of these gems, quite many of the top tier players quite literally have more awakening gems than they can use or would care to use for. So if you are relatively advanced account holder, you should just at this point use your 6-star awakening gems for whatever you feel like it. They really are nowhere near as valuable as they used to be, and now we are consistently getting more and more gems on monthly basis in side events and everything else. If you are, however, a newer player and want to kind of like get the optimal benefits or gem the most important champions, then this video might be a bit better for you. Now keep in mind that this video will undoubtedly have a somewhat of a slight bias towards Alliance War and towards Battlegrounds, because largely for virtually everything else in the game, as I have been insisting for a while, if a champion is in general great for Alliance War and Battlegrounds, in 99.9% scenarios, that champion is going to do well in virtually all of the other areas in the game. And that is because those are effectively the most effective and used and potent champions that are being used at the fights and game modes where it matters the most. So, if it works there, it will almost always work everywhere. Obviously, with the way the nodes are being designed, there are some champions that shine on specific lanes, and you can make a Civil Warrior look amazing on a specific Act 8 lane. Doesn't mean that it's a great investment of a gem, in my opinion. So, for those of you who are in the bigger rush or like to take notes, here is a small write-up for you, effectively kind of like just a list of champions that I will be going over, and also kind of like a quick top 10, in my opinion, of the best champions to use gems for in the game right now. Again, on all of this list, there is slight leniency towards Battlegrounds and Alliance War, but every single one of these champions, aside from explicit defenders, will function very well in the rest of the game modes. Alright, let's get to it. So, start with the Science class, Scorpion. Now, initially I was kind of skeptical of Scorpion's awakened ability, because I didn't think it matters too much, but ever since I started using Scorpion, I just realized how important that awakened ability is, and not just for Alliance War and just for Battlegrounds, because that healing ability is very, very helpful there, because everybody is running willpower typically. That means Scorpion is getting a ton of healing, and can top off his health. But also primarily because his taunt can allow him unblockable special attacks, and that is a huge bit of utility across the game, especially given how Kabam is loving their unblockable, and they're spamming it in tons of quest nodes and in champions kits as well. So this ability is just becoming more and more valuable. And the good thing is you don't need to bother sigging him past 660 or so. You will be fine there. As long as you get him to about 660, is fine. You don't need to take him to 600. Moving on, Spot. Spot is not like that. You do want to have as high sig as possible on Spot, ideally 200. And, well, without exaggeration, Spot's signature ability is what makes him good. If Spot is unawakened, he can be an annoying defender, but he will not be an effective attacker, and he draws a very, very large proportion of his damage from his awakened ability with his Fury, and also with extra bursts of physical damage for each spot gain during the last portal block. And you can make this last on every single hit of your special attack. You can check out the spot guide that I posted, but that awaken ability is extremely important. Moving on, Thing. Now, Thing is obviously primarily for people who do care about Alliance War and Battlegrounds, but it is not just a defensive champion, and that is kind of surprising, because Thing has become more and more impactful as an attacker in Alliance War. He's never the fastest, but he does the job quite well, thanks to his immunities, number one, and it's all immunities, but his shock immunity, his bleed immunity, and also his immunity to nullify and stagger. For Science Champion, it has been very helpful, and I myself have been using Thing in top tier Alliance Wars for quite a while now. Additionally, Thing is a very useful champion for those of you who do zone 25 incursion pushes or want to do those zone 25 incursion pushes, because past zone 11, virtually any contact with your opponent does trigger protection and Thing goes virtually immortal. So Thing is a huge help for incursion pushes also. Moving on, Mr. Fantastic, just an amazing champion. For general content, story content, you can get away without his awakened ability, but his awakened ability effectively is increase in power gain, and that is most important in Alliance War and Battlegrounds. It is super helpful to have in the rest of the content as well, because as soon as you get your Careful Study passive, you have 50% increased combat power rate throughout the entire fight, which makes it so much easier to manage your opponent. And most importantly, it lets you stop focusing on knocking down the opponents with heavy attacks as much, and you can just spam your specials to do that instead. And yeah, Mr. Fantastic, I still think is heavily underrated champion in the game. And next up in Science Class, Overseer. The thing with Overseer is, I didn't mention, with Mr. Fantastic, you do want to have as high sig as possible. With Overseer, you do want to have either him at the very least awakened, because that is the most important thing, because that helps him ramp up quicker. Because if opponent ability fails due to his personal immunity or reduced ability accuracy, they take a burst of damage, and Overseer gains 1 gamma power charge, and that just helps him ramp up quicker. So unduped Overseer is bad. Low sig awakened Overseer is already significantly better. In order to access more damage, you do want to get him high sig. But yeah, Overseer is definitely worth it as well, in my opinion. And surprisingly, I do think that Awakening Joe Fixit is a solid idea. I think he's becoming more popular, but he's an amazing champion in general. And he's, again, one of those champions where you want to have him at least be awakened. And that makes a massive difference, because every time you use special attack, you're going to get stack of cards instead of having to rebuild. So that's the thing that makes him playable realistically. If you do have him high sig, even the better. Moving on skill class, it's undeniable that Nick Fury is the best use of a skill awakening gem. Has been, will be. It's a completely different champion. As an attacker, obviously having second life can be extremely helpful in virtually every single piece of content. It just gives you another layer of security and access to that nutty damage. As a defender, it just extends fight time and is one of the main reason why Nick Fury is a good Battlegrounds defender. So there is that. Nick Fury definitely up there. Kingpin, in my opinion, is also one of the best champions for a gem, because of how well he does in virtually all the game modes. There are still a lot of people who are sleeping on Kingpin, in my opinion, or don't think too much of him. But I promise you, he was my first rank 5 champion for a reason, and he has 3 specific SIG levels, also quite important. You want your Kingpin to be at least SIG 1, ideally 65, or SIG 200. And that is to do with how many of his rages active you're going to get at the start of the fight, and also consecutively every time your power buff expires. So if you have him at SIG 1, he's going to enter the game with 2 rages, and then whenever you parry, he's going to get 3rd. And at 65, he's going to get the 3 rages. At SIG 200, he gets 4. So the higher is the better, but 65 is typically considered to be the sweet spot for Kingpin. Now, Korg obviously is pure defender, and this is primarily Alliance Wars or Battlegrounds rank up. Well, this is exclusively Alliance Wars or Battlegrounds rank up. And the reason why I'm listing Korg here, even though I'm not listing too many of the defenders, is specifically because Korg is an amazing defender in every meta. That's all there is to it. I don't think there has been a meta in Battlegrounds where I'm not running Korg on my defense. And he's just one of those things where you do rank him up, and he's going to stay in your deck. He's always going to be helpful. Obviously quite useless on attack, or relatively useless in attack, even though I have seen some interesting things. But as a defender, he's one of the best Battlegrounds defenders. That is what you would get if you gem him. Now, Valkyrie obviously is going from strength to strength. She is extremely important champion, in my opinion, for the skill class in general, because she kind of works like a pseudo Quake, because you can do fights just by hitting in the block. Obviously, that's not the fastest way to use her, but it often is the only or the safest way. And with her, you do want to have her at SIG 200 as well, because then her utilities of stun immunity and ignoring unstoppable are just that much easier to attain. Valkyrie is a great champion, even unawakened, but awakened she does get more, and it is worth it because, again, she's being dominant in Alliance War, she's being used in Battlegrounds, and she's helpful in the rest of the game as well. Especially once you kind of practice with her, and trust me, it is definitely worth it. She bypasses many different champion abilities. Let's move on to the next one, Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi is another champion that I kind of changed my mind about his awakening, and that is largely due to the fact that you can perform critical hits through opponent's block, and personal abilities that trigger on critical hits will also trigger through block, so you can trigger your chi charges through block. And that is quite helpful. The damage burst part, I don't think it's significant, so even at SIG 1, I think he's fine. I don't think there's massive difference of having the 10 or 20% extra burst damage in level 2s, or your critical hits specifically. But at the very least, you can give him a gem and don't bother sigging him up. That's fine. Next champion, the best mutant awakening gem use for sure in the game is Archangel. Also, he doesn't really need to be SIG. That whole SIG 112 thing, stuff like that, it really doesn't matter. I had a SIG 200 Archangel and like a SIG 20 rank 3 6-star Archangel, and I realized that in not a single fight I wished or cared for my SIG 20 Archangel SIG to be higher. So as long as your guy's awakened and get him to SIG 20 to SIG 40, it will be fine. Having him at a higher SIG obviously is slightly more helpful, but again, he typically is one of those champions. If he works for a fight, he will work for a fight. And again, I didn't have a single fight where a low SIG Archangel kind of like, had something fail or something didn't happen. It's fine. Just awaken him, give him some barely any 6 stones, and you don't need to bother seeing him up too much, and definitely well worth it. Next up, it's Kitty. Kitty is again 3 level, well, basically 2. Kitty is one of those champions you can just give us Awakening Gem and forget about. She's gonna function perfectly fine at SIG 1 because then you access the most important bit of her SIG ability, which is whilst you're phased, you take no damage at all. Otherwise, it would be take 80% less damage. Still good, but this is much better. And then past that point, Kitty at 670 is all you virtually need. That's SIG 1, 670, and that's pretty much what I recommend. And obviously well worth, one of the best champions in the game. Next up in Mutant class, because Mutants do not have too many Great Awakening targets, I would argue Toad is definitely one of them. Now, Toad is a solid mutant. He's not at the top of the class or the best champion in the game, but he's quite solid on his own, and obviously he becomes much more dangerous when awakened and ideally high SIG level. Because you do get extremely meaningful benefits. He becomes much more dangerous as a defender because reaching 10 prowesses, in other words, whenever opponent purifies 10 poisons or is immune to poison 10 times, you just automatically stun the opponent, and that alone often can finish the fights and mess your opponents over. So defensively, it matters a lot, and offensively as well, because your prowess potency depends on your SIG level, and additionally, you gain an indefinite prowess, increasing special attack damage by up to 25% when a personal stun or poison on the opponent is purified or fails to trigger. So definitely well worth the gem in my opinion. Moving on, Domino, not too much to explain there. I don't think her ability is important offensively. Defensively, it is very important, and she is one of the best all Battlegrounds defenders. So if you care about Battlegrounds, give her a gem, take her to 200. Not much else to say there. Omega Red, another one of those champions that's the best for Battlegrounds and for Alliance War. And if you will awaken him, you do want to take him to SIG 200. Moving on to Tech class, how Nimrod, the higher SIG, the better. Even awakening him already improves him a lot. Against mutants, he will always generate extra armor up and gain extra charge, basically. And the higher SIG, the better, because it increases his duration and potency on his unstoppables, energy vulnerabilities, energize, and virtually everything else. So definitely one of the best techs to awaken, in my opinion. Ghost, still absolutely worth it. A gem and SIGs on her. Starting the fight in phase is nice. It's not the crucial bit, but gaining that power so much quicker and getting to special attacks faster, super important. Now we have Guardian, another champion that has been kind of like getting more and more attention recently, primarily due to battlegrounds, but he's useful virtually everywhere. He has a ton of utility, and he's one of those champions where you absolutely want to take him to SIG 200 because of the way his SIG scales. So basically, if you can't SIG 200 him, probably don't bother much, because most important thing of his energy resistance, last 46 give you more than the previous 106. So you do want him at 200, giving him massive block proficiency, energy resistance, bleed resistance, critical damage resistance. All of that is crucial. Warlock, a lot of people underestimate his SIG ability, and it is a massive impact on his damage output, especially in shorter term content. So I do fully personally would justify giving him a gem and all the 6 stones, given how versatile he is, how great he is, how well he manages opponent's power. The only kind of like slight downside of Warlock is the damage, and SIG ability helps with that. So dig it up. And the newer edition, now I'm not 1000% sure of this guy, but he is my most wanted champion in the upcoming featured, and his SIG, by the looks of it, is definitely extremely important. So I would give him a gem in a heartbeat personally. And I do think it will be extremely significant. Now, after Cosmic class, Herc, do I need to say more? Just give him a gem, give him all the 6 stones, end of story. The best champion in the game at the moment, the most busted one with the most busted SIG ability. Next up, Hyperion, the champion with the worst SIG scaling in the history of MCOC. Giving him any more than 20 SIG stones is an absolute waste of 6 stones, so do not bother SIGing him up, but he is absolutely worth a gem. Great champion, dependent on his SIG ability, it is extremely powerful. Go for it. Next up, Galen. Galen's SIG ability is extremely situational. In many of the fights, you will not notice it, but when it does come in play, it does come in play in a huge fashion. So ideally, given how popular and powerful Galen is, you do want to get him SIG'd up and get him to 660, and that will be fine. So 660 is the sweet spot. I think my Galen is 660 as well. And yeah, I don't think there's much wrong with giving him a gem. Then we have Null. This champion is a bit different in the sense there is absolutely no point in giving him a gem if you're not going to give him the 6 stones. And if you're gonna give him the gem, make sure you get him basically all the way up to SIG 200. At the bare minimum, I would say get him up to, well, this is 6 times 13, 78. At the bare minimum, I'd say SIG 80, but ideally you don't want SIG 200. There's a massive, massive difference with low, medium, and high SIG high SIG null. And yeah, pair him up with Despair and Inequity, and he's gonna be amazing. I use him a lot in ton of game modes, and he's growing on me more and more. CGR, not the most needed SIG ability, but given how popular he is and how often you more than likely will be using your CGR, it doesn't hurt to give him that gem. Do not bother SIGing him up. That damnation damage really doesn't matter much in the great scheme of things, in my opinion. But ability to Fate Seal the opponent is quite beneficial because you can get rid of all of the opponent's buffs. So go for it. He's not too bad. And the final, Mystic class. Mystic class actually has quite few champions now that are well worth the investment. Number 1 is Tigra. Obviously, only if you are willing to put in the practice, time, and effort to hone your skills with Tigra, and you do want the SIG to be basically 200. So if you do not know how to play her, it's not for you. But if you are willing to learn, 1000%, she needs to be awakened, and there's a huge difference, and it's well worth it. Next up, Absman. It's kind of similar thing. Absman definitely becomes much easier to play at a high SIG because his forms are lasting longer, and his regen obviously is becoming more potent. And also, personal regeneration effects pause for 3 seconds and absorbing man is struck with true damage. That bit doesn't matter. It's just the longer forms, and it is quite important. And he is great champion. However, he might not be for everybody because he can be somewhat tricky to use. So again, if you're willing to put in time and practice, 100% worth it. If not, then perhaps not for you. Dr. Doom, again, a champion who is perfectly fine unawakened, but his awakened ability is quite helpful, especially in situations where you can deal the power gains. But in any other instance, when you automatically shock opponents by nullifying their buffs, can be awesome because you can either go and cheese stuff with infinite heavy slaps, makes him harder to fight against, and he's one of those champions you use all time, everywhere, in every game mode. You might as well get any benefit and make him as good as you can. Then moving on, Spider-Man Supreme is growing on me extremely fast. I took him to rank 4 recently, and he's much better than people think, both offensively and defensively. Obviously, if you do get used to him, then he's not that big of a threat defensively, but still can cause problems. And his sig ability is extremely important because it increases the potency of bursts of your damage from your level 2, and increases potency of any copied buffs, and all of that is super helpful. There's just no other way around it. The sig ability does give him quite a lot of benefit. Moving on, Diablo, well worth the gem in my opinion. I don't think you need to 200 him, but if you are running Liquid Courage Double Edge, this is a definite awakened ability for you. Then we have America Chavez. If you have a relatively established roster, I think she definitely benefits a lot from her awakened ability, and she is very solid champion these days. Jugs. Now, Jugs' situation is relatively straightforward. If you like him, give him that gem, because in some fights it will not matter at all whether you can or cannot nullify, but if you use him, it does come in play. He's usable unawakened in most of the matches, but in a ton of instances that awakened ability does help him be even faster, even more aggressive. And about 660 is fine for Juggernaut. I wouldn't give him more than 66 though. Moving on, Longshot, another one of those champions that's kind of resurging recently due to battlegrounds, and for that he becomes significantly harder as defender at a high sig. I recently actually took my own Longshot sig 200, zero regrets on that, because every time opponent dexes, you have a 60% chance to nullify that buff and replace it with bad karma, which is going to feed his Mystic Dispersion, obviously, which, can lead to some very, very tough fights. So that's what I think, and let's get back to the write-up. So basically, here are all the champions I mentioned in the video, and overall, top champions for generic gems, I would say, are Hercules, Archangel, Mr. Fantastic, Kitty, Tiger, Absorbing Man, Nimrod, Scorpion, Kingpin, and Ghost. Those are the champions that I'd most easily give that gem to. Let me know what you guys think. And I will see you guys later. Bye. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information